Kia ora and welcome to Sam's Take, a series about entertainment news and reviews, with me, Sam Realstone. Today, we're farewelling the God of Mischief, looking at the last 2 episodes of Loki on Disney+. These final 2 episodes were a lot, so there's going to be a huge spoiler section later on in the video, but for now, let's get into some general thoughts and excitement. First off, not a really prolific prediction of mine, but Mobius was still around after being pruned, which makes sense because it would be a bit ridiculous for Marvel to waste Owen Wilson like that. Mobius, like Loki, was in the Void, the place you go after you get pruned, and there was actually quite a few Easter eggs in there. Firstly, the Thanos copter, which is what you expect it is, a helicopter used by Thanos in the comics. Ridiculous, but it's canon now. And you might recall I mentioned Frog Thor in the last episode, and we got him! He was hopping around in a little jar underground. It was a very quick kind of blink if you miss it moment, but still amazing nonetheless. I love that Marvel's just pulling all the really weird stuff from their catalogue now they've kind of gone through the basic, more easier to explain stuff. As a comic fan, it's a huge payoff and a lot of fun to watch. The gang of variant Lokis that we met at the end of episode 4 were an absolute riot, and created quite a touching moment between themselves and our main Loki. His goal began as wanting to get rid of the TVA to restore power and free will, and now it's wanting to do that so the other Lokis can have free will, to have the ability to change, to be better. Also, as I've mentioned before, the way Loki talks to Sylvie and the progression of their relationship is quite masterfully written. He's talking to his past, present, and future self from all timelines. He's seen his forged path in episode 1 and said no. Unfortunately, that's all I can really say without spoiling too much, but I've absolutely loved this series. The creative choices have been bursting with intention, decisiveness, and it's just been an amazing ride for a fanboy like me. With that said, and if you don't want to know any more, thank you so much for joining me on these chats about this series, and I'll see you in the next review. For those still here, let's get into, well, all of it. Let's start with He Who Remains. I mentioned this character in our first episode of Sam's Take talking about Loki, this entity who lives at the end of time. But who is he? Someone that we also mentioned in our first episode, Kang the Conqueror. Kinda. After making it through the Void, Sylvie and Loki meet Jonathan Majors as Kang, though he never drops that name, who was protecting the timeline from, well, himself. I was initially a bit iffy on this performance, found it a little trying too hard to play an all-seeing, brain-addled Time Lord who's just a little bit quirky. But it slowly grew on me, and we may get a different performance with many variants of Kang in future content. Kang explains that the variants of himself discovered and travelled between the multiverse in the 31st century, meeting up with the other variants, sharing technology, and overall having peace, until one disrupted it. This caused the multiversal war and the creation of Alioth from all the time travel negative vibes, essentially. Alioth made his comics debut in 1993, and in short was a being that eats temporal energy and is at odds with the evil Kang the Conqueror for control over time, being kept in a section of time as it were. He then gets accidentally released by Ravonna, also known as the Terminatrix, when Kang is in a coma before the Avengers save the day, as one might expect. Our original Kang, this Kang Who Remains, used Alioth to end the multiversal war, then created the TVA to protect the single timeline he made, then used Alioth as his version of a recycle bin on your computer. Kang Who Remains is another good example of a villain-type character where you kind of get why he does the bad things that he does. He protects the literal fabric of time and space at the expense of taking variant lives for his workforce. Honestly, I was not expecting Marvel to blow this many beans on one series. Not only did they do Kang, but they've blown this entire cinematic universe wide open. So, what does this all mean for the MCU going forward? Well, there are endless possibilities, endless timelines, but in my head, surely this is how we get mutants, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four. There's also a season 2 of Loki on the horizon, so what will that entail? Loki is seemingly in a new timeline at the end of this season, so is he going to try and hunt down Sylvie? Surely he can't dawdle with that task. Also, where's Ravonna? All of this will be answered in time, of course, but where does the MCU go from here? As I say, I wouldn't be surprised if this is how they introduce the X-Men and mutants to the universe, as well as the Fantastic Four. I also hope this opens the door for Marvel to adapt the Secret Wars storyline, which is basically about all the realities about to collide before Doctor Doom brings them all together and creates a world where he reigns as leader before a small group of heroes who remember what the world used to be try to overthrow him and bring back the timeline. That's a lot, I know, but it's probably a good few years away to be quite honest. For the more immediate future, I'd say this multiverse subject will play a big role in the Doctor Strange sequel, The Multiverse of Madness. It's in the name, so. The next Spider-Man film, No Way Home, is due out at the end of this year, with Doctor Strange also appearing, and Alfred Molina confirmed to be reprising his role as Doc Ock from 2004's Spider-Man 2, making the most sense for that character to come from an alternate reality. But as I mentioned in a previous episode, Kang, or an evil version of Kang, is reportedly set to be the villain of the next Ant-Man and the Wasp sequel, Quantumania. But when will that take place? There's 2 years worth of content before that arrives on our screens in 2023, not pending any pandemic-related delays, of course. With sequels to Thor, Black Panther and Captain Marvel all scheduled to be released in 2022 between Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, plus numerous other Disney Plus shows, who's to say they won't have subtle nods to the multiverse? I'd say not all of them will be affected by this, and they're probably set before the events of this Loki series, but you never know. Kang seems like a threat that needs a little more than Ant-Man and the Wasp if we are going towards the whole realities colliding and multiple Kangs, or one particular one looking for another war. So he actually might be the next Thanos in the upcoming phases of the MCU, popping up here and there over post-credit scenes until a final showdown. Either way, this series about a little Loki that could has been a wild ride, and never really had a dud episode. An amazing job by all involved to create such a compelling and entertaining story with very little bumps in the road. Again, thank you for joining me and listening to me get to use my comic book knowledge on this series, and I'll see you in the next episode of Sam's Take for more entertainment news and reviews.